Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for day 2 of interviews for the Community Nominating Panel for the Board of School Commissioners. We've received 17 applications this cycle, and the community panel has voted to move 6 candidates forward for interviews. Interviews were conducted starting last week, Thursday, on May 22nd, and today is day 2, May 27th. The public vote for the top candidates that go forward to Mayor Scott for consideration will be held on May 28th at 5:30 p.m. At 6:30 p.m. In compliance with the Public Meetings Act, these meetings will be open to the public, and links to join the call, as well as recording of the session, can be found on the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success social media pages, as well as the Board of School Commissioners page on the Mayor Scott's pages. This evening, the community panel will have one interview, and I see that our candidate is currently on the phone. So just as a reminder to everyone on the call, the community panel will go round robin style and ask one question each for the first round. And after everyone has asked their question, the student representative will be given preference to ask an additional question before opening the floor back over to other panelists who would like to ask additional follow-ups. After that point, we will turn the floor over to our candidate to ask questions back to the panel. And then I will be the timekeeper for today's interviews and will alert the group when we're nearing the final 5 minutes, just to make sure that we are keeping on time. I see that our candidate is currently online. Miss Jasani, am I saying that correctly?
Jasani, yes.
Jasani, yes. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you just heard my brief intro. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I will turn it over to our student representative. Oh, sorry, actually, I will do roll call first so you can hear everyone who is on the call. And then I will turn it over to our student representative. So I'm community panel organizations. I'm just going to go down the list in order alphabetically of your panel, of your organization. And please do to state your name so we can all know that you are here. American Civil Liberties Union.
Hi, here.
All right. And that's Frank Patinella.
Sorry.
Yes, no worries. American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Okay. The Associated Student Congress of Baltimore City.
Benjamin Grimaldi.
Thank you. Okay, Baltimore City Council of Education, Workforce, and Youth Committee. I do not believe we have a representative on the call. Baltimore City Public School Administrators and Supervisors Association.
Muted. Carl E. Perry here.
Thank you. Baltimore Family Alliance.
Brianna Kaufman.
Thank you. Baltimore Teachers Union.
Present, Diamond Tay Brown.
Disability Rights Maryland.
Good evening, Tasha Marshall.
Good. Fund for Educational Excellence.
Hi, Roger Schulman.
Maryland Alliance of Public Charter Schools.
Mackenzie Allen.
Parent and Community Advisory Board.
Present, Jason Green. Good evening.
PTA Council of Baltimore City.
Charles Smith, present.
Thank you. Special Education Citizens Advisory Committee.
Good evening, everyone. Sheila Billups.
Good evening. And then the Mayor's Designee.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Brooks.
Thank you, everyone. So with that, you all, our community panel, you all have your questions ready, and I will get us started with the student representative. Please, Benjamin, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the first question.
What unique skill or characteristics would you bring to the current school board?
Hi, thank you for that question, and thank you everyone for being here. So I am a former Baltimore City special education teacher. That is how I began my career. And since my time in the classroom, everything that I have done in my career has been impacted by that experience serving our students with disabilities in a Baltimore City high school. I think the unique characteristics that I would bring to this role One are the fact that I have served in education policy and implementation roles at the local, state, federal level, as well as worked with school districts nationally and internationally with a focus on helping school district leaders with strategic planning, equity audits, school improvement, and just generally working with coalitions of folks, very much like the coalition that's on this call today, representing all of our stakeholders to work collectively to ensure that we're really meeting the needs of all of our students. And I think the fact that I have been able to support many districts around the country with this make me uniquely qualified for this role, as well as my personal lived experience as someone who was an immigrant student myself, as an English language learner, as a member of the disability community. I think I also bring a lot of experience of some of our students that often face really unique challenges and who have the opportunity to be served by the board in a way that can really transform their outcomes.
Good evening. How familiar are you with the rights of students with disabilities, specifically in the state of Maryland?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I would say that is my area of expertise. In addition to being a special education teacher, I worked in collaboration with the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education and the Maryland State Department of Education in our special ed division. And in that role, I supported directors of special education from across all of our counties in Maryland, both in interpreting the law and mostly in applying that law and figuring out what best practices and research can we apply to make sure that we are continually accelerating the progress of our students with disabilities. And then more recently in my work in education consulting, I've also worked with districts around the country in really thinking about with all of the changes in the education landscape over the past few years, what does that mean for our students and how can we continue to make sure that we're providing a free and appropriate public education to them?
Thank you.
Good evening. Can you share how you see the role of the CEO and the role of the school board? How do they differ? How do they overlap? And how do they interact?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I see the role of the school board as being primarily a governance-based role and the role of the CEO as being primarily a management role. And I think where the overlap happens is in establishing a vision and a strategy for the district collaboratively. But I think that the levers that the board and the CEO can use in order to enact that strategy are where some of the key differences lie. So for example, when it comes to what are the specific strategies and initiative that the district wants to implement when it comes to curriculum and instruction, I think that's an area where the CEO, in collaboration with other senior district officials, would be able to make a lot more of those operational day-to-day decisions. But the kind of collaborative side of that with the board would be when it comes to things like approving contracts, setting policies, and really a focus on setting those goals and managing progress and monitoring progress over the course of the years to be able to look at from a big picture view, are those strategies and initiatives that the CEO is setting, are they actually effective? And if not, what policy changes, what might we need to make, what collaboration might we need to do, what community engagement might the board need to do in order to make sure that collectively we're working towards that shared vision.
Thank you for that response. Part of the role of the Board of School Commissioners is to negotiate with the employees as unions. What do you know about the current issues and/or dynamics of the school board and unions that represent city schools employees?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I am a former union member myself. I was a member of BTU as a teacher when I worked in city schools. I have also collaborated with the other unions on this call, as well as with unions representing various stakeholders around the country in my work supporting districts. And so I think I bring a collaborative spirit and also an understanding of just how effective a lot of our collective bargaining has been in Maryland and in Baltimore specifically, which we can see by the fact that we have some really impressive salaries and benefits. There's always room to grow, but I think that speaks to the power of collective bargaining. And I think in terms of issues and dynamics, something that is critically important for the board to address is going to be retention of staff at all levels, including teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, every staff member who works with our students. I think the number one biggest risk to us making progress is going to be if staff leave, which we're seeing is a trend across the country for a lot of reasons. And I think that our unions have an opportunity in collaboration with city schools to set the types of working environment, salaries, benefits that would really entice us to retain our most excellent staff and also to recruit other folks to come and join us and paint these professions in education as really a worthwhile investment in them, as well as something that is a values aligned and mission driven career.
Thank you for your response.
Good evening again. This is Sheila Billis from CCAT. What role do you think systemic racism has played in the school system in Baltimore, and how should the district leaders address its legacy?
Yeah, I think that systemic racism is woven into the fabric of all of our institutions, particularly our education system, and particularly in Baltimore with our unique history in the state of Maryland. I think we can trace back policies and decisions that were made both in recent years and much longer ago, and see the specific impacts that that's had on our students. A very concrete example, I know you are representing CCAC, something that affects our students and families with disabilities is significant disproportionality. So we, like many other districts around the state and the country, are disproportionately suspending our Black students with disabilities at higher rates than other student groups. And systemic racism is one of the root causes of that disproportionality. There is a lot of work that is being done to address that. And I think that there's still a lot more work that we can do. And as far as specific actions that the district can take, I think a combination of addressing symptoms and causes is needed. And so that could look like both things like anti-bias training, where we're changing hearts and minds, but also things like continuing to look at our code of conduct, looking at our policies and practices. A change that city schools made relatively recently that was actually very helpful in this regard is removing disrespect as an offense for which a student could be suspended, knowing that disrespect is something that is racially coded. And can be subjective. So I think continuing to take actions that address both the policies and practices as well as human bias is really necessary to address the impacts of systemic racism.
Thank you very much for your response.
Hi there. Thanks so much for being with us today. And just to say on the record, I need to recuse myself from your vote because I'm an advisory board of the organization you work for, but I'm grateful to be able to participate and ask you a question. So one of the responsibilities of school board members is to approve and provide oversight over the budget. And I'd be really interested in you sharing with us any experience you have managing a budget. If you could share with us a little bit about what your role was specifically in managing that budget, the size of the budget, et cetera. And just to be clear, we don't expect many of the candidates have had experience with a $1.7 billion budget. We're just trying to get a sense of what, or understand what kind of experience you do have with the budget.
Yeah, great question. So personally, in my current role, I manage a much smaller budget. We're talking, tens of thousands, not quite $100,000. And I have a great deal of autonomy over that budget, including setting a strategic plan for how it's going to be used in our work, setting a strategy allocating dollar amounts to that strategy, and then ultimately spending that money, and then being able to share with data, this is how the money was used, here was the return on our investment. Beyond that kind of direct budgetary management role, one thing that I have done in my previous role as an education consultant is supported the district leaders who were in charge of managing their own budgets through leading them through a strategic planning process. And so oftentimes a big part of that process is we have this much money to spend, this much is discretionary, this much is tied to certain types of spending. And my help would be enlisted in figuring out what are our priorities, how can we make sure that this budget fits our priorities, and in some cases also what processes should we use. So for example, I've had districts ask about participatory budgeting and community-based budgeting, and making decisions about how much influence community members should be having in the budget. So I have that experience as well, though I wasn't the one directly making the budgetary decisions.
Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Mackenzie from the Maryland Alliance of Public Charter Schools. What role do you see charter schools play in the city schools portfolio?
Yeah, I think when we talk about charter schools, the word innovation is often used to describe the role of charter schools. What I think is interesting is that in many places around the country, the possibility of that innovation then translating into this for the students of the whole city isn't always there, but that is the case in Baltimore City. And so I think that there is a really great opportunity for charter schools. We have several charter schools in city schools who have actually implemented various initiatives through having a little bit more of that budgetary autonomy. And when those initiatives have been successful, we've seen traditional public schools also implement similar initiatives because they have, a way of looking at what success can look like. And I think the role of the board as an entity that gets to set that vision, that gets to set that strategic direction, I think board members should be looking really closely at what those initiatives are, whether they're working, and what could the scalability look like for the ones that are really having the desired impact we want, so that we can extend those benefits to all of our students.
Good evening, Salimah. Please describe the role you think families and communities should play in decision-making at the district level.
Yeah, I love this question because a huge part of my many roles that I have played has been working specifically on community and family engagement and on increasing the voices and representation of families in the decision-making process. I think that there are a lot of opportunities that we currently have as a district organization to increase the voice of families at the decision-making table. I really believe that our families are, beyond knowing what is best for individual kids, also often have access to resources and insights that would otherwise be lost when we're not hearing their voices. And so one of my goals for the district is to create additional opportunities for families to be involved, and particularly for family members who aren't always heard, who are less likely to volunteer to have their voice be a part of the process for various reasons. I think of my own experience as an immigrant. My family would never in a million years have gone to North Ave to speak at a school board meeting. It just wouldn't have happened. And so what does it mean to engage those families who still have valuable insights in places where we're really meeting them where they're at, literally and figuratively, to ensure that we not only have families at the table, but we have diverse family voices at the table, and we're hearing from a larger and larger subset of who our families really are.
Thank you for your
Thank you. Charles Smith from PTA, sorry about that, taking notes. Can you share your impression of the alignment between the school board and parents in the community? And also, how would you respond and work with parents or the community when the two are not aligned?
Yeah, my impression is that we often hear about the situations where there has been a lot of tension But personally, as someone who has worked in our schools, I've also experienced a lot of opportunities for collaboration. So I think that there have been some really good bright spots where families have been able to really make a significant impact in the trajectory of a school or of the district. And there have been many, many times where families have felt like they haven't been heard. And so to answer your second question of how do we address when when there might be differing opinions, I think that in any district there are going to be times that decisions are made that not everyone will agree with. And so in order to make those decisions, something that's really important is having really clear, transparent communication about how a decision was made and truly being willing to listen. I think especially in family engagement, not necessarily going in with a set, this is the decision we're going to make. But we actually really do want to hear from families about what their various opinions are. And I think a tool that I used often with the districts that I supported was called the modes of decision making. And there's a spectrum where occasionally a district or any organization needs to give information, and that's just what it is. This is the information, this is the decision. And there are times when a decision is made and it's completely, democratic. It is literally the number of votes we get is what's going to determine this decision. But the vast majority of decisions are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And so being really clear as a board, as a district, with what is this decision? And I think what I would always encourage districts to do is, can you push a little bit further? Is it possible that maybe you can't go completely democratic, but you can have a committee that makes a decision that has parent representation? Or can you pause a little bit, get additional community engagement, send out a survey, really focus on getting some responses and then revisit? And so I think that type of compromise combined with clarity on what type of decision is being made is something that would support it, so that we really are having not only hearing parent voices, but actually being able to show, look, this is how we have responded to those voices that we've heard.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's great.
Good evening. No one is held more accountable than school leaders. However, part of the role of the Board of School Commissioners is to hold the CEO accountable. How would you hold the CEO accountable?
Yeah, I think first, definitely want to echo the statement about school leaders and just name that I think school leader burnout is an incredibly important issue. And so I'm glad that you're talking about accountability, because I think that support at the school leader level is also really important. As far as holding the CEO accountable, I think that the more systematic the school board can be in what is it that we are rating a CEO's effectiveness on, that is going to help ultimately with accountability, and particularly with timing right now, and knowing that there is going to be a new CEO starting next year. I think we have a really good opportunity to say, this is what we're looking for, and here are the courses of action that are available to us if that doesn't happen. And I think that there can be a temptation to tie that accountability to very specific numbers. If we hit this graduation rate, we're good. If we don't hit this graduation rate, we're not good. But what we've seen, even in the past few years with the impact of COVID, with several other kind of factors that have played into it, I would like to see that those results are important. Our graduation rate, our literacy rates, our test scores, all of those things are important. And what is also important is the CEO someone who is willing to listen to the community, to the board? Is it someone who's willing to change their mind on certain things? Is it someone who's willing to make hard decisions, but then communicate about why those decisions were made and what might then change a decision in the future? I'm a former English teacher. I'm a big rubric person. So my rubric would have a combination of those qualitative and quantitative factors. And I would be looking for a combination of those when making decisions about accountability.
Thank you very much.
Good evening again. I have a two-part question. What was the hardest decision impacting youth that you've had to make? And describe how you made the decision and the results of the decision.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think that the hardest decision about youth that I had to make was in conversation. This has actually happened more than once with a couple of school districts that I have supported in the past few years, where generally speaking, my role has been more to be, as a consultant, as an advisor. I'm not, most of the time, I won't give very specific, you have to do this, you can't do this. I think the exception to that, though, is when I see an inequity issue forming. And so there have been a couple of times where in my former role, even at the expense of potentially losing a client, putting my job at risk, if a client wanted to make a decision, when I say client, this is, school district leaders, if a client wanted to make a decision that I felt like would disproportionately impact a certain group of students or was ignoring the specific experience of a group of students. And so to give you a really specific example, in one of my strategic planning projects, based on community engagement, it was very clear that certain subsets of the community, specifically family members of color and teachers of color, were experiencing the district differently than their white counterparts. That was very clear. And so it was very important that the district have a certain part of their strategic plan that would address specifically how are we going to address these disproportionate impacts. And the district really didn't want to do that. And so they tried to reframe the issue as we want to increase, we want everyone to feel like they belong. And so what we're going to do is we'll have more town halls and we'll have more field trips and we'll invite parents. They kind of turned the issue into something that it wasn't. And so in that moment, I made the decision to say, no, you need to directly address the experience of your families and staff members of color. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to move forward with this strategic plan because this is what your community is telling you to do. And ultimately, the district did decide to move forward. We did have to work a little bit on language and how to talk about it. This was in a state where there were certain words that couldn't be used. But ultimately, the outcome was that we were specifically talking about disproportionate impact on families and on teachers, which we know also had an impact on their students of color. And so I think the ultimate impact is that their strategic plan did acknowledge that those differences existed and that there were strategies in place to try to increase equity.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we have 5 minutes left on the clock. I will hand it back to our student panelists. If you have one last question that you would like to ask, please do at this time. Otherwise, I'm going to hand it over to our candidate, Ms. Jasani. If you have questions to ask to the panelists, please do after the student panelist goes. So Benjamin, do you have a final question?
Yes. Which personal or professional experience do you think most qualifies you to serve on the Board of School Commissioners?
I think I've spoken a lot about my professional experiences, and I do believe that they qualify me. But if you had to ask me what is the single experience that has really made the biggest impact, I would say that it is my personal experience as an immigrant student growing up and attending a school where there was no one else that looked like me and no one that spoke my language. And the reason I say that is because I think every single thing that I have chosen to do in my life, I can trace back to the importance of belonging for a child who didn't experience that in her own schooling experience. And so that is what drove me to want to become a teacher. That is what drove the decisions I made in my classroom. And every career choice that I have made since then has been around creating a school district where all of our students are able to experience that sense of belonging. So even though that was a really difficult experience for me personally, I'm really grateful for it because I know exactly what I don't want for students. And I'm very committed to making sure that our students are able to have a really fulfilling educational experience regardless of their identity.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Jasani, over to you. Are there any questions that you would like to ask to the panel members? And it can be open, it can be specific to one panelist or just open to the group.
Yeah, a question I have that, and it is open to anyone who would like to answer, is I know several of you have been doing this for years. You've interviewed countless candidates, many of whom, have served on the board. And I'm curious what would be either the advice that you would give, or what is something that you wish you could go back to those candidates you interviewed who have served and say, remember you said this, or, maybe I wouldn't have voted for you if I had known you were going to make this decision. What are some of those types of things that have come up?
I think one of the things that's interesting is when we interview candidates, um, and certainly, yeah, there is often a real sense of clarity and independence in sort of the perspective they bring to the interview. And I think there are times when you become one of 12 that it is hard to continue to assert that independence. Or and I sometimes look at the board and wonder, would we have I don't necessarily mean this as a critique in the way it sounds, but would we be further along if everyone could sort of maintain that level of individuality or independence that they come to the board with? And I understand that decisions have to get made through compromise and lots of other things, but I think there's something interesting that happens once people are on the board, and I wish I could crack that nut and sort of figure out what it is, and encourage people to just sort of keep that sense of independence that people seem to have when they're going in. Sorry, repeating myself. That's my opinion.
I would just like to add that a lot of times on these interviews, we hear a lot about community, we hear a lot about student voice, but don't necessarily see that once there's the full board. And so as Roger, I don't want to repeat what Roger said, but it's just what Roger said. We hear a lot about, a lot of individual, I want to say almost like non-negotiables kind of that come up in these interviews about what the candidate would like to see or push forward or really work towards. And then we know it's a board, so you have to work collaboratively and work, but holding to some of those non-negotiables with a focus of community and student, because that's who it's about, is the student. So I just wanted to just add those pieces to that as well.
I'll say, make sure that you go visit the schools. There are going to be many presentations conducted by staff. They'll say that this is taking place and we're putting this on our agenda. Make sure you visit the school, speak to the staff. You can even speak to the students to find out really what's taking place. Don't just take the presentations at face value, because sometimes, they're pretty, but they're really not working for us.
I would just add that when many candidates, I would say, in this, people we've interviewed in this interview and in other years, when they get that question about the parent board clash, I feel like the response is always that essentially the board is going to make the decision that we want, and we're going to convince the community and or parents that we know what's best. Yes, we're going to listen. Yes, we're going to get feedback. But at the end of the day, we need to make a decision for our organization. And we just got to figure out a way to make you eat it. And I think that what parents, students, community, and staff are looking for is more of a power shift, and some board members and district leaders that are a little more comfortable with conceding power. And yes, most of the time the employer is going to make the decision and you got to eat it. But maybe there is some room for sometimes, no, what the student said is better than what we thought of. And if it's better, Let's go with that, what they said. Yes, we spent 7 months on our great PowerPoint and plan, and we have all the data, but their plan is better. Let's go with that. And I don't think that community and other directly impacted individuals have felt that type of consideration, that type of power, that type of willingness for more of a power shift.
Yeah, and I would just like to add, as PTA, a lot of times we hear about what's best for the district, what's best for the students. But when we're looking at closing small local elementary schools, we're saying that's best for the district. That's normally not best for the community, not best for those kids. They normally tend to do better in the small schools in their communities where they're close to their families and things like that, trying to make them bust over across North Avenue or making them go major streets, or sometimes they get crossing guards, sometimes they don't get crossing guards. That bothers a lot of us a lot of times, because we always hear what's best for the community or something like that. I'm sorry, what's best for the district, but not always what's best for the community. And I think we hear a lot of people who come on here over the years and tell us they're going to be there for us. But then as soon as we turn around, we hear another closure. We hear another issue. We hear we didn't have power in this school. We had another school that the pipes froze because we didn't have the power on for that school. I don't understand how that can happen. I oversee a $53 million budget across the state of Maryland with 27 business units. I would be fired by my CEO if even one of those situations came up, just one. So I have a problem that we have a district that can't even do that just in one city and maintain it for our students.
Thank you all. I really, really appreciate those responses.
Ms. Jasani, we thank you again for your time this evening and for interviewing with the panel, for your interest in the Board of School Commissioners. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us this evening. This brings us to the end of our interview rounds, and the links for the deliberation and voting session have been posted as well online and has been sent to you all. So I hope you all have a great evening, and we will see you online again soon.
Have a nice evening. Be safe.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.